Hey, Riverline College, Section 71. I greet you on the Sunday before we begin our second week of the school year. Things are already starting to howl and move in terms of the school year just whipping by. I had, a pretty good day teaching online Friday. I got to the end of my classical mythology class and I started thinking, you know what? To the extent that someone can, I think I kind of dialed it in today because I had last Friday 3 really good classes and a lot of smiling, happy faces on the Zoom screen, the live Zoom screen, and had a couple great moments. One moment was when I could see that they had the chat going. I don't know if you've been on Zoom or not yet, but there's a chat feature. That always makes me nervous because I got my hands full just trying to operate the program and think and speak. And at the end of the class, I said to them, I'm nervous. I can see you've been chatting. I see 26 comments. Probably just editorializing on how I'm screwing everything up. And they just started yelling, Johnson, open it up. And they wanted me to read it because they were really saying sweet things about me. And they wanted me to feel the love. This is a little different. This is kind of like throwing a feather into a canyon and waiting for some kind of sound to happen. But I did start reading the journal entries that some of you put up. I think I'm 5 or 6 students in. And so 5 or 6 of you have grades so far and feedback on your entries. And so far, you seem like really nice people. And I see a student from the summer on there at the end, Adam Wilder, you're going to regret this. Anyway, I don't know if I'll ever have a moment where I just feel like I did it. I'm teaching asynchronously well. I have some stories embedded into this lesson that I'm going to put before you today. The principal thing that I want to talk about are the modes of writing, the modes of modern writing. I may be misremembering the composition theorist that wrote the book, The Modes of Modern Writing. I think I had the idea that it was James Knievy, and I was going to go look that up because I've been saying that for years in a classroom. I might be wrong. But it's for today, anyway, before I get all ancient on you. Today we're going to talk about a modern way of thinking about how we behave when we pick up a pen or a keyboard and decide that we're going to write something. They are 4 in number. You've heard of 3 of the 4th for sure, and I know you know the 4th. I know you've engaged in these modes of modern writing, but I'm going to talk about them. And there's a couple of points I want to make about it. I also want to put before you a poem by Marie Howe, and I've told you already, I got equipment coming, and it's going to be making me look pretty good. And also coming soon are my skills with editing. Right, I've got Final Cut Pro. That's how I'm going to edit these videos, and I'm going to take a shot at embedding a YouTube video into this. Sometimes I just shoot these and I upload them after one take. It's really hard to get around the fact that it's just a middle-aged man talking about the things that he loves and is passionate about, but I'll do my best to make sure that these are captivating and just as dynamic as a dinosaur like me can make them. So I got some storytelling to do, and the modes of modern writing, and my outro today also involves a story that's about writing from a kid that I had just a long time ago. Now, Marie Howe, whose face you're going to see in a minute if the techno gods smile on me, Marie Howe is one of the queens of American literature. I love her so much. You're going to hear the New York in her. She's a New York City girl, born and raised. And you'll hear me say again and again, my friend, my friend, my friend. To some extent, they are my friends, the poets I've hosted. Marie Howe is an actual friend of mine. We go back some years. And I brought her to my college in the year 2015. In a minute, you're going to see her read a poem called The Gate. And if you're curious, go online and do a Google search, go Marie Howe, The Gate. And I'm using this video because it's pretty high quality, but the next one is of her reading at my college when I was there in 2015, I think, 2014 maybe. I'm there with my wife and my boys who were still living with us at the time, and they're young, of course, and we're all younger. And the main thing I want to tell you about this book is I can't believe that it didn't win either a National Book Award or a Pulitzer Prize. I was going down the road with an African-American poet named Major Jackson a few years ago, the year that I hosted him. And I said, you know what? I think Magdalene is going to win the Pulitzer. And he got so excited. He said, Jeff, I'm with you. I think she deserves it. It's her turn. And I don't know how she was possibly overlooked for it. She's just a superior poet. And this poem is about her brother John. A lot of her work was inspired by the life and death of her brother John, who died in the AIDS epidemic before we could figure out how to control that disease. And my goodness, did she love him. She'll prove it with this poem.
Marie Howe is a New Yorker, best known for her book What the Living Do, poems she wrote after her brother John died of AIDS. Marie Howe, who said, John's living and dying changed my aesthetic entirely.
The gate. I had no idea that the gate I would step through to finally enter this world would be the space my brother's body made. He was a little taller than me, a young man, but grown, himself by then, done at 28, having folded every sheet, rinsed every glass he would ever rinse under the cold and running water. This is what you had been waiting for, he used to say to me. And I would say, what? And he would say this, holding up my cheese and mustard sandwich. And I would say, what? And he would say this, sort of looking around.
Okay, I need to fulfill a tradition today, and I have a story for you that really doesn't have very much to do with writing. But there's things that I do year after year after year, and I want to tell you a story that hopefully will make you be a little bit more careful about how you're living your life. And let me just talk, and it'll come all clear. But before that, I need to make a comment. Stories can be persuasive. Sometimes I tell stories that have no beginning or ending, but and they're just, they're anecdotes. And sometimes I tell a story, I want them to be illustrative of a point. I want the story to teach you something. And I know from experience that you've got to be careful with storytelling because they can have rhetorical effects that you don't intend them to have. And so let me give you an example of that. My dean at Riverline, Kelly, has now for 11 years. He's always finding something for me to do. And he's always giving me suggestions. He'll say something like, hey, maybe you should teach classical mythology. Well, I've been teaching it for 10 years now at Central Lakes College. About 9 years ago, when Kelly was still the dean of the liberal arts campus at Central Lakes College, he asked me if I would be willing to be a speaker at a group up there it's called the Center. It's a senior citizen center for all the gray older folks in Brainerd to give them something to do. On another day, I'm going to talk to you for sure about the solitude so many of our elderly people are living in. But the Center is kind of a scene where they gather, and once a month they want a guest speaker to come in. And he had done it the year before. And I said, well, I'll miss my class. I'll miss a couple classes. He said, don't worry, I'll give you administrative leave off. So Kelly put me in touch with these people, and there was a day where I went in there. I taught a couple of morning classes and then drove over. Again, I don't live in that town. I've been a commuting teacher to that town for 10 years. And I gave a little speech. And the theme of the talk was about reinvention of self. Getting fired was very fresh in my mind, and whoa, did I have some savage mementos in my broken heart. So it was, pretty proximate to that experience. And I also wanted to take a poke at a very famous mythologist named Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell, in a Bill Moyer interview in the late 70s, made the proclamation that when you get really old, that the main thing you need to realize is that you have the right to just sit in a chair and go, wow, look at everything I did. Look at my life. Look at everything I accomplished. And you don't have to feel like you have to keep accomplishing things. I told those senior citizens that day that I didn't believe in that. As a very slowly emerging senior citizen, I told them that I never wanted to be in a spot where I'm sitting in a chair watching Bonanza or something and thinking that I don't have to keep doing something. Then again, that's pretty easy to say when you're 52, 53 years old. So here's the unintended consequence that day. I tell this story, and they gather around me afterwards, and they were all excited. And there was one woman in particular that wanted to talk to me, and she kind of laid back because she wanted to be last. So I talked to these people, and one of them I remember wanted to give me the etymology of the word saboteur, because I'd used that phrase, saboteur or inner saboteur. I didn't know that it went back to early French. And everybody pretty much cleared out, and it was just me and this woman. And she was wearing this red dress, man, and she smelled like money. She was all blinged out, her hair was done, red dress, red shoes, and the bling was not costume jewelry. The gold and the diamonds were real. And when it came time for her to thank me for the talk, she ran up to me and just threw her arms around me and hugged me. And then she took me by the shoulders with both of her hands, and she said, "This is the most inspirational day of my life. I cannot believe I had the luck to come and hear you talk about reinventing self." I said, "Okay, well, you're welcome." Then she said, "I'm going to see my lawyer right now, and tonight I'm leaving my husband for good." And I'm like, wait a minute. And she bolted out the door and started whipping down the hallway. She said, "Thank you for everything." And I called out to her, "Hey, are you sure you're doing the right thing?" She said, "Absolutely." And she just waved her hand and just kept moving. She didn't even turn around. And I watched her whip down that hallway to the extent a 75-year-old woman can. She threw open the door and was up very quickly. Before I knew it, she was out on the pavement where the sunlight was dancing around. And here's another story with that I hope has a particular rhetorical effect. I'm all about rhetorical effect. You might hear a window slam because the wind blew that window shut. Now I've got less breeze. It's all right, it's cooler. Second story, before I tell you about the modes of modern writing. Let's go back to about 1978 when I was a first-year student at St. John's University. I got the suspicion that I was losing my hair. I thought my hair was falling out. I thought my hair was receding. And I was 18 years old, and I was in a rock and roll band, and I was narcissistic because that never dies. And I called my mom. I'm like, "Mom, I think my hair's falling out." She says, go see a dermatologist. I said, okay. So I went and saw a dermatologist in St. Cloud. I go in. The guy was bald as an egg, right? Just totally shiny bald. And he pointed at his head, and he said, "Don't you think I would have done something?" And I said, "How much money do I have to pay you today to mock me?" Went home, called my mom again. Still calling my mom anytime I got a problem. She's 91. I think I told you that. And she said, "Jeffy," she still calls me Jeffy. "Jeffy, you come down and you see my dermatologist." And I did. And he took me very seriously. He looked at me for a while, examined me, and then he took me in his office and sat me down in this red leather chair. And he got pretty solemn, but he was trying to be hopeful. He said, "You have blonde hair. Blonde guys lose their hair more quickly than dudes with dark hair." And I said, "When I look at you and I look at your dad, for instance, I got a funny feeling. Yeah, your hairline is going to recede, but when you're, in your 50s and 60s, I bet you still got a little hair left up there." He was right. Look at all the hair I got. So here's where the story gets kind of funny, but pretty serious too. The next day, the following Monday, I get on the bus to go to Shakespeare, the upper division 300 level Shakespeare class that I should not have been in. And I was, in other words, everybody was 22 and I was 18, thinking I could handle it. I got a gift-wrapped C in that class. A friend of mine sat down. This is the serious part. I hope you're listening to me. A friend of mine sat down next to me, and his name was Pete Smith. Pete said, "How'd your weekend go?" And I told him about the dermatologist thing. I told him that they did hair pull tests. And he said, "What's a hair pull test?" I said, "Well, that's when they plunge their fingers through your hair, and you can do it anytime you want. And if you get a few hairs, it's normal. You're probably going to grow back. But if you get a bunch of them again and again, you're probably losing your hair." Right then and there, Pete Smith, who was a brunette dude, he had dark hair, he took his fingers and he plunged them into his hair, and he got like 50 50 hairs. I laughed. I went, whoa, look at that. And he dropped the hairs on his Riverside Shakespeare. And then he did it again. And then he got 100. And he went just ashen white. And I was laughing at him. Pete didn't even go to class that day. He was so freaked out. I pitched him into a quarter-life crisis. I didn't intend to do that. And that whole week, it seemed every time I saw Pete, he was pulling at his hair. I remember looking down from a fourth Bennett window, and he was walking in the rain and worrying it, pulling it out. And this is where the story gets a little more dramatic. On Thursday night of the week that I told Pete Smith the story about the hair pull test and sent him into existential crisis, we were all at the Midway bar. The drinking age back then in Minnesota was 19. That was a terrible idea. I hope none of you agree or think that it was a good idea. It was not. We're in the bar, the Midway bar in St. Joe, and I'm the bartender. Okay, that was my way of kind of being at the party without drinking. And I'm going up and down the bar and I'm getting people beers. And it's just pretty much our crew. A few locals, some farmers, and 40 or 50 Johnnies and Bennies. Regular night, just a regular night at the Midway, middle of the school year. At about 8 o'clock that night, a van pulled up to that bar, and a devastatingly beautiful woman got out of that van and came in that bar, opened the door, and just took us all in at a glance. She did a beeline for Pete, who was sitting at the end of the bar next to the jukebox, which made it hard to eavesdrop on their conversation. She was a little bit older than us. Again, a very, very beautiful woman that wasn't one of us. She wasn't a student. They talked for 2.5, 3 hours, and at about 11 o'clock, they got up and started leaving together to get in that van. The woman went out the door first. Pete hit the doorway behind her, and as he was heading out, I called to him. I said, "Hey, Pete, are you sure you're doing the right thing?" He said, "Absolutely." He smiled. And he got in that van, and in that moment, I was the last person at St. John's or St. Ben's to speak to Pete or hear his voice again. He got in that van with her, and they went out to Bennett Hall, where Pete lived. She backed the van up to Bennett Hall. Pete went in and got absolutely everything he owned, piled it into the van, including my copy of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-5 and my Neil Young Decade album. We never heard from him again. He vanished. Highway 94, some of you might know, goes only east-west. And I have a very strong suspicion that they headed in the biggest direction of them all, which was west. We never heard from Pete again, ever. We don't know what happened to him. Was that the love of his life? Did I catalyze a crisis that sent him reeling away from university? His parents came to the campus for weeks after that, asking, "Have you heard from Pete?" This is no cell phone world, right? Our computers were crap too. There was no way to find him, and we never heard from. I'm repeating myself. We never heard from him again. It has taken me 11 minutes and 20 seconds to get to this idea. There are monsters among us. You must be safe. I'm addressing largely a group of young people, and I know a lot of you are PSEO students, but you have absolutely got to take care of yourselves and look after yourselves and look after each other. Colleges and universities lose kids every year. Every single year it happens. There was a period of time there where students, male students in particular, were disappearing along what we call the I-94 corridor, which runs all the way across Minnesota and into Wisconsin. Often it involved water. It still involves water. During that period of time, St. John's University, my old place of work and my alma mater, we very famously lost a kid named Josh Gamone. It's often the same scenario. The kid is at a party like Josh Gamone was one winter night. He leaves alone around 11:30. We never found him. We have no idea what happened. There's a psychologist that I know who's a criminal profiler there named Aubrey Immelman, who's an Afrikaner, who thinks he knows what happened, but we can't prove it. I remember those days. I remember we were scuba guys, were going into the water. Johnnies and Bennies were walking through the woods with hands linked, looking for him. And it happened last year. Maybe you don't know this. It happened at the University of Minnesota Duluth. there was a young man who was in a bar, and he was in the bar with Jordan Snelling, who's the son of one of the best friends I have. And they were students at UMD. They got separated. The kid left early on his own. Jordan was texting him. Well, we found him in the water. How did he get there? Please be safe, current or future college and university students. Please be safe. Know who you're with. Be careful with the partying. Maybe don't do it at all. There is a reason why insurance rates are expensive for people who are between the years of 18 and 25. That's because accident is the number one cause of death, car accidents. And this always seems like an important thing to say. Yeah, it's taken me almost 15 minutes to give you this information, but you've got to look after yourselves, look after each other, and we're in the pandemic. There was a recent poll that asked a bunch of 18 to 25-year-olds if in the pandemic they've had thoughts of suicide. 1 in 4 said yes. Get help if that's you. Seek out counseling. If that's you, contact me. I'm better than nothing. Be careful. And the women in this class need to especially be careful. A percentage of you are going to be sexually harassed or even sexually assaulted in the next few years. And I just love you, and you gotta be careful. And I'm at 14 minutes and 21 seconds. So I'm switching gears. And I always feel like if I just say this every year, if I just say it fall after fall after fall after fall, that I won't lose a student in that way. I got to remember to pray about Pete today, wherever he is. So I should have made the little flashcards, because that's what you got to do when you, although I'm going to get good at embedding stuff here. I know it. I know I'm going to get good at it. So we'll just use thin air this time. Let me teach you something about writing. In the 1980s, and let's say it was James Kennedy, there was a PhD, a professor named, let's just go with it as Kennedy, who kind of just sat in his office and he thought, wow, people when they write in different ways, to different purposes, to different aims. And he asked himself, how many different ways can you write? How many different ways can you behave as a writer? And I'm going to put the 4 before you now. And this is your first real writing lesson. And Adam, you've already heard this. So you took the class where I was cannibalizing Comp 1 material. It's your fault, bro. Can I call you bro? The first mode of modern writing is self-expressive. Okay? And since I have no one to talk to, I'm not going to ask you for the examples. But self-expressive writing is what it proclaims to be. It happens anytime you pick up a pen and you're writing about what's here, what's in the interior. Self-expressive writing could take the form of a text. I worry about your thumbs orthopedically, but when you text someone, you're expressing self. You're talking about yourself. Artifacts could include a text, an email. You could write a letter. And it's dead simple. It's where everything begins. Last week when I said, hey, tell me who you are. Introduce yourself to me. Tell me about your lineage. I was asking you a question that you will respond to in a self-expressive way. And again, I've only read 5 or 6 entries so far from each of my 4 classes, but I also asked you another question that would call for a self-expressive reply. When I said, how'd your first week of school going? Tell me about your classes. Everything good? You all right? It's really simple. Self-expressive writing is denoted by the I, right? The first person pronoun I. The chances are excellent that you've been told by an English teacher, don't use the first person pronoun. We can address this on another day. That's not me. That's not me. Sprinkle the pronoun I, the first person pronoun I. Sprinkle it on your prose like salt. You can't hide behind third person. Thoreau says that on the first page of Walden Pond. It's always the first person speaking. The second mode of writing is persuasion, persuasive writing. That is writing that is about making an argument, right? And you've already done this, and you're going to do it for me in a quality way in this class very soon with a persuasive essay. A persuasive essay is an example of one in which you sit down and you make a claim and you back it up. You might say, I believe, which is the strongest way to create a clear, compelling, riveting thesis statement. You could also write an op-ed for the St. Cloud Times like I did recently. I do that whenever I feel like it. You could write a persuasive letter. Every single time I write a grant, I am writing I'm in the mode of persuasion big time. I'm approaching the Minnesota State Arts Board saying, hey, you should give me $70,000. And here's why, because here's what I'm going to do with it. I'm going to do all kinds of exciting things. And I'm bringing back my Verse Like Water series. Even in the pandemic, I got a plan. I'll tell you about that another time. A speech, here we are in this political season, is always written. They write those things out, or speech writers write them out. Those are persuasive too, because every time we have an election in this country, somebody gets on a soapbox and says, vote for Pedro. And I am married to a woman named Jessie because I was a good enough persuasive writer to, from the base of a mountain in southeast Alaska across the summer of 1983, convince her to marry me. I did that as a writer. Everything that I have in my life, I've gotten because of my ability to persuade. And we're going to have a large unit on persuasion, and I'm going to take it further at them than I did this summer. You have got to be able to argue from causes. You have got to be able to argue logically, although modernity has taken that too far too. So we're halfway done. Self-expressive, persuasive. The third mode is exposition. Expository writing is writing in which is a mode that's all about conveying information. If you have a textbook, if you're taking a chemistry class, and I know some of you are, and I know some of you are taking intro to psychology and maybe a philosophy class, if you have a textbook, you are going to be reading information. The first section, I don't know if Austin has a newspaper, it has to have one. Usually the first section of a newspaper is informative. You're just getting the facts, right? Dictionaries are exposition or informative. Encyclopedias are informative. And when you're done with Comp 1, which is largely about self-expressive writing, you're going to take Comp 2, and you're probably going to produce a research project. And that involves you researching and writing and working with ideas that are not within you, but outside of you, and your relationship to those ideas. And the third one we don't have to belabor, it's my favorite thing. The fourth mode of writing is literary. And at this point in time, and I'm not going to be too sad about this, we really are down to 4 types of literature. We have novels, we have short stories, we have poetry, and we have plays, drama, the theater. We used to write epics. We'll talk about that later in the semester, but we don't believe in happiness anymore. We don't believe in heroes. This is the era of sadness and tragedy, and it's been like that for about 150 years. Isn't this simple? We write self-expressively, we write to persuade, we write to inform, and we write, if you really want to be good at it, or really go for it, you'll try to produce something literary. So what's the takeaway on this? The takeaway is that this class will help you grow as a writer if I give you the opportunity to write probably in all 4 modes, but mainly the first 3. Self-expressively, persuasively, and informatively. And I don't have to say those things again this year, but you might have a quiz coming. I want you to know that. It is very rare that you are going to behave as a writer in one of these modalities. Generally, these modes are mingled. They're mashed up, right? You're usually doing 2 or 3 or at the same time. 21 minutes, I want to end with a story that I would tell for a pretty long time. You can tell some of these stories are, old war stories of mine, but I sometimes like to return to my very early days as a teacher. And here I'm returning to my first week as a teacher. And I had a boy. The first student teaching I did was at Tech High School in St. Cloud, and they're building a new tech now. I think it is built, actually. And I was teaching 7th graders, and I just didn't know what I was doing. And there was a little boy in there that would later become a paraplegic in a bike accident. His name was Aaron Cross, and 3 years before that bike accident, he was a little freckly 7th grade boy in the corner. And in my first week as a teacher, I saw him writing a note. Well, now we write each other's each other texts. But in the olden days, if you wanted to write a little girl a note and let her know that you dug her, you'd write it out, and then you'd take that piece of paper and we folded it up into triangles, and we called them footballs. And I could see in the corner that he wasn't working on his worksheet, right? He was writing a note. And he was writing a note because he was in love with a little girl named Heather, who was in the far right corner of the room. He's in the left corner. This is the 80s. This is early in the 80s, where every other girl was in the world was named Heather. That was a big name for a while. The big one now is Emily. The proof of this is there's a movie out there called The Heathers, which is about a bunch of Heathers at a California high school that started killing each other. Don't watch it. It's really dark. But he writes this note. I regret this so much. He writes the note, and he starts passing it. Pass this to Heather, pass this to Heather. 7th graders again. Well, I intercept the note. I grab that thing. And because I was trying to, I don't even know what I was thinking. I was a kid. I was a little baby English major. I took that note and I put it in my pocket and I let Aaron have it. When we're doing worksheets, it's time to do worksheets. And the kids leave. And I took the note out and it was heartbreaking. I opened it up. This is what it said. He had written, I can still remember it, and it's not an impressive feat of recollection. It said, Heather, do you like me or what? And I think it had a blank where she could check yes or no. And she never got it. I put it in my pocket and she never got that note. Maybe his life would have gone differently. Maybe he would have married Heather. Maybe he wouldn't have crashed his bike into a van and ended up in a wheelchair for the rest of his life. Careful on bikes too. But to review, here's the takeaway. That's not literature. That ain't literature. That is not poetry. That is not Shakespeare. But we would all agree. The other 3 modes were present when Aaron wrote that little note to her. He was letting her know, I think you're cute. He was also making an argument, right? Hey, I like you. You should like me back. Let's have an entire relationship in one day. The courtship and the bitter breakup, all between the bus ride, the morning and afternoon bus ride, and then we'll hate each other tomorrow. Remember those days when you were little? And those early crushes? And it's clearly informative. It is clearly the stuff of exposition. He was letting her know, I dig you. So I'm at about the 25-minute mark. I'll cut this. I'll also put up for your consideration and wondering tomorrow that film about wonder that my son made 4 years ago. I hope you have a great week. Your journal entries should be up by, let's just shoot for Monday evening. I'm going to try to make that when we do it. And in this new world, I don't have to get journals back by Monday morning, so I didn't spend my whole weekend with notebooks. But when I get done editing this and pulling this together, I'll get back to reading journal entries and getting ready for tomorrow. Stay safe and stay